Director for Internships and Career Counseling here at the Career Services Office at Princeton University. Thanks so much for coming to our final event in the Imagine Speaker Series. We've had the privilege of hearing from alumni talking about their unimagined career journeys over the last couple months. And today we have with us Marc Rosen from the class of 1998 to share with us about his unimagined career journey in the film and entertainment industry. Marc Rosen comes to us with 10 years of experience in the film industry. He is the co-founder and partner of the film production company Rosen Ops Production, which is based at Paramount Pictures. In his 10 years in the film industry, he has produced film and television projects at Heyday Films, which includes the Harry Potter franchise based at Warner Brothers, the Threshold series on CBS, and founding the feature film division of Landscape Entertainment. He's also been involved in other projects, which include collaborations with DC Comics, Tribeca Films, and Disney. Before he started his film career, Marc graduated with honors from Princeton University with an AB in English, Literature, Drama, and a minor in French.
I did?
Last we heard. So please join me in welcoming Marc Rosen.
Thank you. I didn't know about the honors part, actually. Thank you so much for coming on a Friday. I know it was supposed to be rainy and cold and awful, and it's turned out to be kind of pretty, I would guess, by Princeton standards. So I appreciate you coming and cooping yourself up with me. Hopefully I'll be mildly entertaining, very informative, and then everybody can afterwards attack and grill me with questions, and I'll be sticking around. I don't have to get back to the city super fast. So anybody who's applied for internships or anyone who wants to talk about LA or whatever, the film business, TV business in general, I'm around. So don't worry, I'm not skedaddering after that, okay? I think my path started off very unimagined because my first experience in Hollywood was the quintessential awful one. I went out at spring break in my senior year in '98 with a suit that I had bought, later to find out that nobody wears suits out there. In fact, anybody here who interns for me knows that this is the most they've ever seen me dressed up, probably. And I took my new Banana Republic suit, I believe, and marched on out to Los Angeles with an armful of introductions and recommendations and whatnot on spring break. And I landed at the desk of this woman who was the head of production at Warner Brothers TV. And she got my resume in front of her, and she looked up from it, and she said, "What did they teach you at Princeton about what to expect when you get out here?" And I said, "Well, they didn't really teach me to expect anything." And she said, "Well, I got news for you. Nobody's going to care how smart you are or what you have to say or what you've done or how creative you are. You're going to shut up and get coffee for 5 years, and then maybe somebody will want to hear what you have to say after that, okay?" That hurt a little bit. I sort of tail between my legs, came back to Princeton, swearing that I was going to go to New York and do theater, because Broadway seemed like a much nicer prospect at the time. And I got back and I actually began to think, you know, life is about, if you look at a lot of these journeys, and it's funny because I was reading about the other speakers who I find far more accomplished than myself, but these unimagined journeys, I think, come from sort of facing those kinds of moments of adversity and making a choice. And my choice was to say, screw that, and I'm going to go and blaze my own path and try to do it differently. And luckily, what ended up happening, because I got motivated in the middle of my senior year, I started doing research, started writing a little bit, I started getting in touch with people in the alumni community. I started, before I was even out there, taking that sort of nervous energy and using it to get in touch, to reach out. And when I got to LA, I was fortunate that actually my current business partner was then my boss, Linda Obst, who has produced everything from Fisher King, Sleepless in Seattle, Contact, One Fine Day, How to Lose a Guy in 10, blah, 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 blah. And I landed on her doorstep, and I got quite a different reaction. She brought me in, and she said, "So what do you think you know?" And I said, of course, after the last experience I had, "I don't think I know anything," was the answer I had at that point. And she said, "Well, that's a good answer." She said, "I want you to go take these 10 scripts and take them home and read all of them in a week and give me a set of notes and come back in and talk to me about them." And I said, okay, thinking in my head, well, I'm an English major. I read plays and books and write about them every day and whatever. So, and she's certainly not going to be as hard on me as my professors are. So I figured that would be okay. So knowing nothing, which I later learned was probably a good thing, or else I would have been really scared. Knowing nothing, I read 10 scripts. I did up notes on them. Not all of them were very nice. I didn't know any better about being diplomatic at the time. And I turned them back in. And it was an exercise that really felt no different than the things I'd been doing 3 weeks earlier at Princeton, frankly. And so she brought me back into the office, and she sat me down. I had no idea what her response was going to be. And she said, I've never met anyone a week out of college who could read and analyze and do this already. I want you to come into this next meeting with me. I said, okay, still in the ridiculous suit that I shouldn't have been wearing. She took me into the next meeting with her with two people I didn't recognize but would later come to know as an important writer and an important director, and sat us all down, and I thought I was just going to be there to observe how things work. And she said, Mark, give your notes. Now, luckily, I was ignorant enough to not know that that was totally inappropriate, to not be scared, and I did. I gave my notes, and we ended up conducting a meeting that she let me, knowing nothing, sort of run, frankly. And by the end of it, we were talking about a draft that reflected the notes that I had just given. Well, then she walked out the door and drove off, leaving me there with a lot of angry current employees at the company who were looking sort of at the door of the room I was sitting in, like, what is going on in there, and so forth. And she called back to the office, and she said, that's it. She said, here's what we're going to do. She said, I'm going to pay you nothing. I'm going to lock you in a room for 3 months. I'm going to make you read 400 scripts. You're going to go around to 40 of my colleagues and find out what their 10 favorite scripts are, and you're going to read all of them. And then we're going to start talking about developing material. And I said back to her, okay, I said, give me 3 months, and I'll be your best employee ever, or you can get rid of me. Otherwise, then you're going to promote me to being a regular executive, which in Hollywood parlance, you usually do end up being an assistant or interning, then being an assistant before you sort of make that leap to executive. I didn't know that at the time. And that usually is what allows you to get enough experience in seeing your boss doing it so that you can then make that leap when the time comes. She agreed. And 2 months later, we found ourselves in the middle of an awful part of California outside of Los Angeles called Alhambra, which you shoot there because all the architecture, it's one of the few places you can find that actually looks like the East Coast if you want to fake the East Coast, in a trailer at like 3 in the morning, shooting nights. And she turned to me and she said, you know what? It's been 2 months, but you're already my best employee ever. Let's start right now. And we did. And that began sort of a path that led me to where I am today. And interestingly, actually, that person is my business partner now. And I'll get to that. What was great about Linda, though, was that she had recognized this ability to read and think and talk, and not just about movies, about life, about books, about other things. And it instantly took away my trepidation, which came from years of having friends who had gone to film schools or conservatories or whatever, and feeling like, oh no, I'm not doing that. How am I ever going to get in the film world or TV world or theater world if I'm not at USC or NYU or UCLA or Columbia or whatever it is? I, at some point, I'm sure broke down to my mom my junior year, like, why aren't I going to a conservatory? And the truth is I think that being an English major was the best thing, and any major, be it any major at this school where you're learning to read and write about what you think about what you're reading, those are the skills that end up applying, and probably in any real-world scenario. But in mine, and I know it sounds incredibly simplistic, in my line of work, the truth is that the ability to read, evaluate, and articulate your thoughts well is 90% of gets you where you're going. I would not get movies made. I would not get directors attached to things. I would not get anything done if I couldn't articulate myself and what I thought about a piece of material when I'm sending it out, for example, a book, let's say, to a director. If I can't write down, this is what interests me about it, thematically, this is what we're after, this is what we love about the characters, I have no point of view, and people tend not to respond to that. So having a point of view has become something that's been increasingly entrenched in what I do. And it's carried throughout my career path, which I'll get to, and it's sort of manifested a couple of key moments where I've had to make choices, and those are the things I'm going to talk about because I think they sort of define that path and hopefully will be insightful a little bit in terms of how I think you go about things in the current marketplace because it's tough out there. The economy's bad. The entertainment business can be incredibly daunting. It seems to be sort of shrouded in this veil of secrecy. We have, I should say, our own lingo for things, We have words that we use that don't exist in a dictionary. I remember my senior year, right before I graduated, I got my first call from Hollywood. And I was sitting in my dorm room. It was the afternoon. I'd already written my thesis, so I'm sure I'd had a few beers, too, at that point. And I get this call, and there's a woman on the phone. And she says, "Hi, I have Norman Curlin calling for Marc Rosen." Norman Curlin was a big literary agent at the time, and he had graduated from Princeton. He was getting back in touch with me. I was not used to the convention of people having their assistants call for them to someone as an introduction. And so very innocently, I said, "Oh, okay, collect?" And she laughed at me for about 3 minutes because she hadn't heard that one before, and then proceeded to put me on the phone and kind of lead me along. And what I realized when I got out there, that there is this huge chasm between what you can know or learn before you get there and what you will learn that you'll either love or hate once you get there. And so I think part of what's interesting about the entertainment business is that it's not for everyone, but there's no way for you to know that unless you try it. And some of my very good friends, who are still my very good friends, have left the business to do other things because they realized it wasn't for them. And there's no shame in that. If you are going to do it, and I obviously love doing it. I love my job. I love what I do every day and am genuinely engaged by life because of it. It demands, I think, simply the sort of passion and perseverance and, as I like to think of it and myself, a little pragmatic optimism to get the job done. But I certainly would take from my story the note to not listen to people when they tell you something can't be done or that's not how they are done. And what I mean by that is you should hear what they're saying and hear the rules, as I did, in order to break them. But you need to hear the rules. That's a mistake I found early on in my career when I made my first job jump. I was at Lindopes Productions for 3 years. I ended up running the company by the end of the first and a half year, and then for the year and a half after that, and decided I needed to make a move. That was probably foolish at the time because it was sort of young, eager energy to get out of there and get bigger and do something new. And so I took a sort of grand-seeming job at a startup company, and there were a lot of startup companies at this time. This was 2000, 2001, and to run their feature division. And to me, this was this great leap. I was going to this $40 million startup. I was going to run the feature division. We would have relationships with studios, blah, 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 blah. Well, I was wrong. And that's one of a couple missteps. And I want to clarify, for me, a misstep is not something that I look back on as a true mistake or a true misstep in terms of it's awful and I lament it and I still pine about it. Rather, I try to look at the lesson learned from it and not make the same mistake twice, because they are indeed mistakes, but they can have a lesson that comes from them, I think, and then you don't have to repeat them, hopefully. So for me, that move was the wrong thing to do, because I went from sort of these principles of being involved in something and at the right level and doing what I was supposed to, and tried to sort of overleap the rules or the system. And in that instance, I didn't make the right move because of the motivations behind it, because I ended up outside the system in a company that fell apart, having to come back into the system. And it's obviously turned out okay, but it was a sort of scary in and out moment for a second. For my first 3 years in Hollywood, it was really, really weird. I wish I could come up with a better adjective. I could probably come up with 25 adjectives. It's one of those places, and this is what I mean about the business too, it sort of becomes endemic in the actual population. LA and the entertainment business are, first of all, inseparable. So the idea of living there and doing other things is wonderful because the people who do it have like great lives, but you do feel very surrounded by movie, film, TV stuff all the time, which if you're in it is great. But it is also hard to find probably the kind of intellectual companionship you enjoy just amongst the people in this room or the people on this campus or in general, because it is a place that is driven by money and youth and looks and money and so forth. And so I think that part of what was hard was not the work, actually. The work was, again, it was like going and being an English major again and writing a bunch of papers every week. It was partially the integration into this society, because having to go do breakfast, lunch, and drinks all the time, having to be chasing after scripts at odd hours of the night, having to do all of these things, they start to sort of make you see that you are going to have a very unusual lifestyle. You know, I still, as the boss of my own company, and being in charge of my own projects, I'm still, you know, subject to them. You know, I have to leave my wife and baby sometimes at 4 in the morning to go be on set to take care of an emergency. I actually get kind of a kick out of it. My wife, not so much probably, but I get kind of a kick out of it and kind of thrive on those things. So my best advice to you, in terms of from going where you are now to standing up here and lecturing to students in 10 years about your successful rise in the movie business, is very simple. I think that, one, you should stick to and be confident in whatever it is you're doing. I don't care if you're a physics major or a history major or an English major. It really doesn't matter. I think you're still trafficking in the same skills, and those will translate into whatever you want to do in the movie business, be it directing, be it writing, be it acting, whatever it is. It does not hurt to be able to articulate yourselves. I think the second thing is that it demands a certain amount of determination and perseverance. There are times when it gets really hard. There are times when I have wanted to drop out of the business. Between the hours, the stress, the joy, but there's a lot of sort of stakes, or at least it feels that way, and everything's a crisis, even though we're not solving, you know, cancer or you know, saving people's lives. It is a very high-pressure business, like many of them are. I think the other thing you have to do that I've learned, and landscape for me when I made that move was a misstep, because it was not only the wrong step at the wrong time career-wise, it was being done for the wrong reasons, and I wasn't sort of sticking to who I am. And I would say that the most important thing, along with being able to articulate what I think and my opinions, is actually having opinions. And that's the other thing that I find that people can get overwhelmed or washed out about when they get to an industry like entertainment, because you're surrounded by a lot of people who think they know. And let me be very candid. There is no right or wrong, I don't think, about scripts, about movies, about whatever. There's certainly things you can see are badly shot or have bad stories or no stories. But in general, you know, I think in a way it's sort of nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so, not to go Shakespearean on you. And for me, what I've always stuck to is my own opinion, my own thoughts about something. And from that very first meeting when I didn't know what the heck I was doing or what kind of meeting I was sitting in, to now, the only reason I think, not the only, but a major reason that things get done within my organization the way things get done is because I'm not, and my partner is not, afraid to really, truly go overboard in terms of articulating our thoughts and our opinions and making sure that that takes things the extra mile, you know? If it demands sitting for 10 hours in a room with a writer to get the draft right, that's what we'll do. If we have to argue for 5 of those hours, debating the story point that's holding us up, we will. And we as producers had to hold our ground and continue to justify, and this is where being an English major came in handy, because when a writer shoots down one of your rationales for a note, you have to quickly have another one behind that if you want to get them to do the note. I found very quickly, and I continue to find, that all sorts of talent, all the people I engage with, the executives, the actors, the writers, the directors, respond to that authenticity. Respond to the fact that I wear my heart on my sleeve. Respond to the fact that I'm not afraid to say something and then say, oh yeah, that was really stupid. You know, that I'm not afraid to give a note or a story point that just absolutely doesn't work in order to create the sort of motion of thought that gets us to the right idea or the right thought or the right note. And so I think that that's something really, really important that I would especially try to impart no matter what you're doing, is that you do have to be true to yourself. And not only that, you have to be unafraid of expressing yourself and exactly what you mean. Life is too short, I think, to go through it hiding your opinions. And if you do what I do, you will not make it very far hiding your opinions. In fact, it's all about, as in that meeting, as in when you sort of rise up through the ladder, it all comes to these sort of cusp moments of having to articulate your opinions and seeing what people think about them. And so it's fundamental to me that and again, I know these all sound very basic, but they're very hard things to stick to once you get into the real world. And then even more so when you get into a world that's incredibly seductive and where it's incredibly easy to go along with somebody else's opinion or go along with somebody else's thoughts. We all have stuff to learn. I'm not an expert, I wouldn't say, on scripts or anything. I probably won't be by the time I die. I'm getting better at working on them all the time. And I hope that I will continue to work at getting better at them, because if I stop, I'll be bored. And if I'm bored, then I'll just, be frozen. And so I think that that combination of kind of passion and authenticity and the educational background, and I'm not saying it's just about Princeton, although I do make certain assumptions about your basic underlying education. It's probably better than my basic underlying education because of how much they've changed the rigors of the program. And that is something that people will poke at you about in the real world. The first set I was on, the one I was talking about, where at 4 in the morning we were in the trailer, nobody knew my name. They called me Princeton. That line producer, who now works for me, still calls me Princeton between friends. So it's something where that people will use it to label you in an industry, especially where they feel intellectually threatened, because the other thing about what I do is it's not making widgets and it's not crunching numbers. So when there is no right answer, there's a lot of people who want to find the right answer or say that there's a right answer and stick to it. And I think that what's, again, coming back to is that you have to be able to stick to your own guns when that happens. If you have to go head-to-head, as I often do, with a director, because our movie isn't going to get greenlit if he won't make that change, and he's saying the whole movie is ruined if we make that change, I find myself at an impasse because I have to talk this person into this note or we're not making this movie. Or I have to make the decision, as I did 2 years ago, when I had a movie that was 2 weeks away from shooting. We were in Toronto. $2 million had been spent already in pre-production. Great young director, amazing crew. And the studio wanted us to cast an actor, who I won't name, from a TV show, who not only didn't fit the part, couldn't act, was only mildly attractive in the opinions of the females on my crew, which doesn't help, and was just absolutely the wrong choice. And so, and this was when I was at Heyday, so we were producing the Harry Potter movies for Warner Brothers at the time, and that obviously gives you a little bit more clout when you have their big franchise. But we said no. The studio insisted that we do the movie with this actor or it wasn't going to go. And my director refused. And at first I was like, gosh, we spend all our time doing everything we can to get a movie into production or a TV show into production. It takes years. I'm sure you've read all these things. On average, it could take anywhere from 3 to 5 to 10 to sometimes 20 years to get something made, depending on the different incarnations of it. So to be staring in the face of, and this is literally in our production offices in Toronto, sitting up there with our sets built, ready to go shoot a movie, making a decision about thinking down the road what that end product is going to be like. Do I want my name on that? And the answer was no. And so we had a very uncomfortable conversation with Warner Brothers, and they ended up shutting down the movie. And it never got made. And it's still sitting there with $2 million against it. And the truth is, and my director's gone on to bigger and better things, and we continue to work together. But the truth is I'm glad that that version of that movie isn't out there with my name on it, because that actor would not have delivered. And this was a thriller, so it wasn't, Academy Award material by any means. But that actor, who's a perfectly nice fellow, there was no way he was going to deliver the performance necessary to carry the movie and make it plausible and make you feel anything about the stakes of it. And so I would rather not have made that movie than just have made it, collected the fee and say, oh, it's been produced. And that's another hard thing, because the truth is, and I'm not trying to make myself out like any sort of creative saint or anything like that. There are definitely compromises that I have to make, more on the TV side of my life, because it's sort of a different balance of power with your network and your studio executives than it is in the movie stuff. And it's also so fast in TV that there's not as much time to argue, so they just sort of go without you if you don't get on the horse with them. But it is an example of one of these moments I'm talking about where instead of choosing a moment of success, in a sense, you know what I mean, going off, shooting the movie, getting that one other credit, you know, blah, 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 let it fall apart for the right reasons, or let it not come together for the wrong reasons, depending on how you want to look at it. And that's equally important, I think. Being able to express yourself in what you want to do is fantastic, but also knowing what not to do, or at least trying to figure it out and really thinking it through in an industry where everyone around you, I mean, I had friends, I had my father saying, "What are you doing? You're throwing away X amount of money. You could just go make the movie. Who cares? It's a thriller." And I was like, I do not want my name on that. And I had the option to, my senior partner at the time, David Heyman, put it all in my lap. He's like, "Listen, I get it. You've been working on this movie. And if you want to go make it, if you think it can be done, if you can talk Peter into it, or we'll get another director and they'll greenlight it, go. But it's your decision." Which was hard because it would have meant money. It would have meant other things. It would have meant a credit. And yet, the people who I respect most, not my colleagues who are other producers, who I do respect, don't get me wrong, not my executive friends, who I also respect, but my directors, my writers, my actors, the people who are going to get my movies made the right way, they all know about that one thing. They all know that it was my decision. They all know that I did that. And they all respect it and will now work on whatever with me. So there's a trade-off in terms of, yes, I threw away a movie and a credit and money. But down the road, and even now, because that was a couple years ago, it's paying off in dividends that come from the measure of respect that it gained. And so it's weird because you do things like that, and at the time I was, of course, you know, am I doing the right thing? And is this, you know, I'm obviously throwing all this stuff away. But obviously, in retrospect, I clearly do feel like it was not only the right creative thing, but, you know, however you want to put it, not to get all woo, but in a karmic sense, in a payback sense, in a whatever you want to think of it as, it did sort of come back to me in spades, making the right decision. And that was very hard. And so I constantly am finding myself faced with these kinds of crises because when you're in a creative business where you're not crunching numbers or manufacturing widgets, there's nothing wrong with those businesses, but where you're constantly debating about what's good, what's bad, what will audiences go see, what's the box office going to be, blah, 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 blah. Now, those bring in some of the business concerns, but what they boil down to are people in rooms arguing about stuff creatively. And people tend to get threatened when they're putting their own egos on the line. You are putting more of yourself on the line when you're saying, "I don't like this about this script," looking the writer straight in the face that you're trying to convince to go fix what you don't like about it. And so you really have to, I think, continue to be perseverant in your own kind of self-sustenance of creativity and knowing that you know what you think, you know what you know, and most importantly, you don't know what you don't know. Because I find that when you have that attitude and you deal with the kinds of people that I have to deal with, that they take it in a much less threatening way. And they're more open, these people who are jousting with you with their creative thoughts and trying to have theirs heard over yours or try to prove who's right. If you approach it in a certain way, and if you approach it with a certain attitude, and I think a lot of things in life are this way, receive you much differently, and the pricklers don't go up, and the getting threatened doesn't happen. And I think it's really important when you leave here and you go to the outside world, because this is a mistake I made. I sort of carried the, you know, in my suit and my whatever, my sort of Princetonness with me. It matters. What you've learned to do here, everything that you're doing with your brains, everything that you're doing extracurricularly, that all matters, and you carry it around inside you. But you can't wear it as a badge, because otherwise you'll get called Princeton for 3 years and nobody will know your name. I also think that it's incredibly important. The thing that I've learned about the business, and this is a real recent lesson to me actually, which sounds odd when I'm about to tell you because I should have learned this right away. But it's not really so much, it is what you work on. But I can work on a good script with this person or that person or that person, or a good movie with this person or that person or that person. And you'll have three very different experiences. Whom you work with, I hope none of my English professors are here, whom you work with is so important. And it's interesting because as I find myself producing things with other producing partners, I find that there's three, for example, that I gravitate towards all the time when we want to do things or bigger things together. And the same with writers, and the same with directors, and the same with actors. They're all being advised right now by their representation, by their agents, by their managers, by their lawyers. When they go out, basically what happens when you sort of break as any of those things is you come out to LA, or you're already in LA, and they send you out on what I like to call the couch and water bottle tour. You sort of go around to a bunch of companies and sit on a bunch of couches and get a bunch of water bottles and whatnot. And that's a very daunting experience too. But when you come out and do that, what people, I think, get very excited about is who they're meeting with and what those movie credits are, what those TV credits are that they have. And that's all important because it does sort of represent the person's taste, hopefully, if they've done their slate of movies well. It represents probably the capacity of the company. It represents what can be done and how big things can get. But what it doesn't represent is the kind of person they are. And I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but again, in the life is too short category for me, is working with people who make it harder, not easier, who think they know everything and aren't willing to admit that they don't know some things. And so whom you choose to work with, including when you figure out your first job, you know, there are people that I see get very excited to work for a very big director or a very big producer, and that person is not a very nice person. And when they're done, they're broken. And they sort of have a bad taste in their mouth about the business potentially. So I think that you have to be very sort of, not very careful, but you have to think about for a second. Look a little bit before you leap. My mom would laugh if she heard me saying that because I am such a leaper. But having been such a leaper and having tried to learn a few lessons, I am now hopefully getting to a point where I'm looking just a little bit before I leap and diving headfirst into things. Now, in terms of my path itself in a technical sense, I started at Lindos Productions in 1998 and was there for 3 years, as I said. We made miniseries, we made movies. At the time, we had made The Siege while I was there. How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days was at the end of our run, and then there was an Ashley Judd movie in the middle of it. It was terrible. Someone Like You, terrible. And we had started, and we did the 60s miniseries for TV, which was a lot of fun, actually, and recreated Woodstock and all those things. It was a blast. When I left Linda's, as I talked about, to go to landscape, I was 3.5 years into the business. I was starting to feel this sort of like 3-year itch, or I don't know what you would call it. And I felt like I needed to make that move, and I did. And there were some things that, aside from the mistake itself and the lessons I learned from it, that were great about it. Being outside of the system, and this is definitely something I couldn't have imagined, but I had to, all of a sudden, sort of self-teach myself a little bit in an MBA kind of way how movie money works. And most of what I do every day is creative, but there is that 15-20% that I have to talk to lawyers, and I have to talk about money, and I have to help get deals closed and stuff like that. There is that element of what I do. What's interesting to me about this landscape experience was all of a sudden being outside of the system, not being with the hot producer who had made 20 movies and all that stuff. I had to scramble, and I ended up running around town and meeting people at every studio and every financing place and meeting financiers from other countries and so on and so forth. And essentially, without realizing it, creating a really good Rolodex. And so, in a weird way, looking at that experience, which had me in a position of much less leverage in the business, which my company was much less attractive to talent and their representatives because we couldn't pay as much as studios and whatnot. In being in that lesser position rather than in the more glorious sort of studio offices or whatnot, I actually learned and created a whole sort of part of my business that right now, as the business is changing right this minute, and producers are becoming financiers, and funds are cropping up all over the place, has me miles ahead of my colleagues who are trying to catch up and figure out how to run funds or how to raise funds and how to make movies in any other way than the traditional, here you go, Paramount, will you please make this for me? Thank you. You know, that's not what's happening. There's a revolution going on, and it's involving people like me who are destabilizing the system because there's this seismic shift going on. Studios, because they're enormous corporations and they're owned by enormous corporations, have enormous overheads, and every dollar you spend on a movie costs you $5, we like to say, or costs you $10 if it's a studio movie. The ability to make movies outside of the studio system and to finance them, first of all, you can make them for cheaper because you're not getting charged the studio rates, which that's a big first of all. Second of all, it allows you to put it together in such an interesting way once you control the negative. You can put it together with foreign investors and sell it to Paramount to release it domestically. You can put it together with all distributors around the world. You can give it to half Universal and half Warner Brothers. You have control over it. But without that misstep at Landscape, where I was forced to run around and meet all these people, and where I had to scramble and try to create Rumpelstiltskin-like sort of business out of whole, nothing, it ended up paying off when it counts. Again, a misstep or a mistake or throwing something away that because of the decision did end up paying off. And if you can't tell, my sort of optimistic pragmatism applies to myself. I like to look at the experiences I've had not badly, because even the bad ones obviously are informing things. And what I found the most surprising, I'll give you an example. I have a colleague who was out of work about 5 years ago when I was at Heyday, and I put together a project for him so that he could collect some producer fees and keep his insurance or whatnot, just a minimal thing so he could whatever. He, in the meantime, like all of us do, has had a revolution, gotten back on his feet, and is at a very powerful financing company right now. We found ourselves chasing after the same novel to buy the rights for it. He has money. I don't just yet, in terms of his company. And they won. They totally won. They bought it for way more than Paramount was going to try to buy it for me. And he called me, and he said, we bought it. We won the book. We're going to finance it. We want to make it next year. We're going to produce it. But I want you to produce it with me. And I said, Brad, I appreciate it. That's way different because producing a movie, producing those fees is different than what I did for him, way different on a grander scale. And honestly, it made me cry a little bit because stuff like that doesn't happen so much in my business. And I'd like to think that when it does, it's yet again sort of one of these things that comes back to pay you off. This was 5 or 6 years ago that this happened, And there are people who, that was a true financial crisis for my friend that he was in to help out. There are lesser degrees of that and doing things for people. And in general, I try to put myself out there. There's only so much time in a day, and my wife likes to see me occasionally. But I try to put myself out there as much as possible with the theory that the sort of more energy you throw out there in a good way, in a focused way, in an articulated way, that inevitably something comes back in return. That you have to keep faith in that, that you have to believe. I mean, if you could hear me talk for 5 years about one of my movies, I probably talk more passionately about it right now than I did when I first bought it, and I was so excited and the endorphins right off of the purchase. And that sort of passion is also, as I've said, fundamental to what I do. Leaving Landscape, which I did because they merged with this company called Artisan Entertainment, which I did not want to be a part of, I had a real decision on my hands. They fired me, so I got a severance check. And I could live for a few months. It enabled me to actually court my wife in Montreal and get her out to LA and get engaged and get that part on track, which, again, I was scared to death being unemployed. But me getting that foundation and having the time to actually teach myself how to cook, because before then it was pretty much a microwave, was fundamental to sort of my core unit of what I do every day. If I didn't have that at home, honestly, I would feel, and I did feel this way in my mid-20s, like an untethered sort of reeling, nowhere to go home to, no port in a storm, and a constant storm in what I do. And so even that sort of few-month period of being unemployed, literally, and collecting unemployment, literally, and not knowing what I was going to do allowed me to get that in order, but it also really allowed me to think. It allowed me to think, what do I want to do next? And this is sort of where I see my life or my career in this moment, in being unemployed and collecting unemployment, after having been at a height and then sort of fallen and then trying to figure out what to do. That I think was the sort of defining moment that put me on the path I'm on right now, because the decision I made was not to leap at the first job that was offered to me, was not to go work at a studio, for example. I am not a studio executive. I couldn't be. I don't have it in my blood. I work with them, and the ones who are good at it are amazing and truly amazing individuals. I don't like wearing suits, and I don't like sitting in board meetings, and I am a guy who likes to be out on set. So those options I knew, and I didn't want to go do those. Again, with friends telling me I was crazy. How can you not take a VP job at Warner Brothers? How can you not? And the same was true of production companies and directors who potentially wanted to partner or have somebody run their company. And I turned down a few jobs and then was getting down to my last nickel and was still turning down jobs because I was trying to look at the next 5 years of my life and take the last 5 years or 3 years of my life and apply it. And what I figured was I need to go work at a production company that has a solid central person that I can become the LA branch of or the extension of, that is on the rise, that has very little on the slate. I need to build something from scratch. And sort of consequently, that's what I've done with my current company. I love building things from scratch, truly. And so I was fortunate enough, literally I was going to have to take one of these other jobs the next week, to be sort of floating around, and one of my friends, who himself had gone in to interview for a fantastic job, told me that David Heyman, the Harry Potter producer, was in town. The first movie was just coming out, and he wanted to find somebody to start the LA office. They didn't have one. To ramp up the operation, to create a slate. There were no projects on the slate at that time. And to really start the company and kickstart the company. So I did everything I could to get a meeting with David Heyman, of course. And he, as you can imagine, having the Harry Potter series coming out, I wasn't the only one going for that job. There were about 100 people going up for that job. And I got to David Heyman at the very end of a very long week, I could tell for him. He is a very energetic person and lovely. He was tired. He looked miserable at whoever he was interviewing before me. And he, when I sat down with him, seemed like he didn't really want to talk that much. We ended up talking for an hour and a half, starting with Shakespeare, ending with my time living in Paris. I don't think we talked about a movie the entire time in that interview. And the next morning, he called me on the way to the airport, and he said, I feel like I not only found a partner, I feel like I found a friend, and I feel like I found a person who, because of how authentically you represent yourself, I feel like you can represent me, the interests of this company, this franchise, and so on and so forth. And then we started talking about movies so he could figure out what my taste was like. But interestingly, it was not my ability to talk about every single movie ever made, you know? It was not my ability to talk about the normal, you know, usually you go into those things with like a list of like, here's my favorite directors and here's my favorite writers, and I'm going to impress you with that. And that's not what this opportunity was about. And so interestingly, because for me, Heyday was a heyday, pun intended, for me, because it's really what got me back on track. It got me happy. It sort of put the world at my fingers, as you can imagine, because walking in and having only the Harry Potter franchise that you're producing, you sort of don't have any negative marks against you, and you have the biggest franchise in the world. So you're sort of given a lot of benefit of the doubt for a few years until you make a bad movie, which hopefully won't happen. And it turned out to be a great experience. And I was encouraged to be entirely myself, to run the company, to interact with every director, actor, and writer myself. And to do it not with an imposed style, which is something that people will try to do to you and have tried to do to me. You have to do it this way. You have to do it that way. You have to get it done. I think every person has to get whatever it is done in their own individual way. And however you're effective. For me, it's one way. I'm not a screamer. I'm not a yeller. I don't do well that way. People laugh at me if I even try to be bad cop. So I'm never bad cop, because that doesn't mean I don't have hard conversations. I deliver bad news as much as I deliver good news. But it's the way you go about doing it. And so this response continued throughout my 5 years at Heyday. I got to create a TV show and a TV division of the company, the show Threshold on CBS. I got to start working on movies with Chris Nolan and David Goyer and Sam Mendes and you name it, across the board. I got access for the first time, really, to London, to all these actors and directors and writers who win our Academy Awards every year that are very difficult to get to because London has its own little film community. All of a sudden, I was a part of it. And that ended up being a right part of the choice, because now I find myself, I have access to people in London. I have, Mike Newell and Chris Nolan's home phone numbers, So that makes my ability to get something done tenfold. And so I have found through those Heyday years that everything that I thought about going about things positively, about putting yourself out there and being totally candid about what you think about projects and totally candid about what you feel and think about really just about everything, was completely fortified by that. And the only reason I left Heyday was because it was called Heyday, and I was ready to start my own company, which for me was a very natural progression, because I can't sit still for more than a second, if you can't tell, as I wear a tread in the floor. And what I wanted to do was very simple. I wanted to start my own production company. And it was another of those moments where, as you can imagine, being the president of a production company that's making a big franchise and has a studio deal has a decent paycheck. When you go start your own company, you've got to find yourself a paycheck. You're your own boss. I was fortunate enough to reconnect with my former employer, now partner, Linda Oakes. And she and I were sort of hitting similar phases in life, although, she's 30 years my senior. And, 28 years my senior. Let's not make her too old. And she and I were at different ends of life. She had just become a grandmother. I had just become a father. And she was looking for a partner to keep it interesting for her, to keep it, to keep an engine in there, to have somebody who doesn't work for you, to have somebody who works with you, and to have somebody who you can call, to have somebody you can strategize with. And I very much wanted the same thing. I'm not sure that, Marc Rosen Productions, I don't know, of course, is in my future. If you'd asked me that 5 years ago, I would have said, absolutely, it's going to be Marc Rosen Productions, But the truth is that, again, a lesson learned that I could never have imagined. Having a partner has been fantastic. Now, it doesn't hurt that she's made 30 movies and kicks ass, but, literally kicks people in the ass. But she is also this incredible font of knowledge, experience, strategy, and she's seen it all. She was making movies in the 80s where she and 3 other women were the only people who were producers or in the game. And you got a bunch of guys, Don Simpson, Jerry Bruckheimer, all those people around, going off to crazy parties, doing God knows what, and trying to figure out her place in an inherently, at the time, male-driven system, which has gotten better, but she is still of that generation. And what's fantastic is this sort of generational combination, her style and my style, her wisdom and my energy, her Rolodex and my Rolodex, where they sort of meet and converge, and where they're different, most importantly, has for the first time made me think, maybe I'd be kind of lonely if it was just Marc Rosen Productions. It's nice having employees. We have executives, but it's not the same thing as talking to a partner, And so for me, at this point in my life, we have a deal at Paramount Pictures on the movie side. We have a deal on the TV side at CBS Paramount, which is a very confusing thing. Basically, Viacom split Paramount in two and gave half to Les Moonves and half to Brad Gray. The Brad Gray side is the movie side. That's where we have our deal. The Les Moonves side is like CBS and Paramount Television, and that's where we have our TV deal. We, in the last year, set up 7 shows at all the major networks, except for NBC, but they were kooky this year because they didn't know what they wanted in comedy. We currently have movies with Jennifer Aniston, Chris Nolan, Steven Spielberg. I mean, I'll bore you if I list the people who we have movies with at some point. And it is firing on all levels. And for me, it's yet another step in what I hope will continue to be an unimagined journey. I could not have predicted. I wish I could have said as a senior, I'm going to go be a producer or whatever. I didn't even know what that meant, you know? I still will probably end up explaining today at some point, I'm sure, exactly what a producer does. But given where I am and how I've gotten here, and obviously being reflective on both the mistakes and the successes, I think that those principles for me really hold true. And now more than ever, I really want to stick to my guns, you know? I want to hear the rules so I can break them, you know? I want to be a pragmatic optimist. And I think being a pragmatic optimist allows you to hear the rules or to hear the whatever and then figure out how to get around. And that applies to anything. That's if you're dealing with notes that you think are going to ruin your movie, that you have to go in the editing room and figure out how to address the concern rather than do the note, because the note or the suggestion of what to do to fix the concern will probably ruin the movie, or at least that's your opinion. So you have to hear people, though, because if you don't, then they're not going to hear you back. You have to remain pragmatically optimistic. And then the last thing I guess I would say is that in the choices that you make, I feel like I interact with a lot of people who are in college and graduating college, and I love sort of doing the internship stuff. And I sense now more than ever this great stress to figure out exactly what you're going to do the day you walk out of the door. Well, here's something beautiful for you about what I do. There's absolutely, well, that's not true. There's a few things that I'm going to talk about that you can do to prepare yourself for going out there. Like my friend Kevin owes me a screenplay, I believe. But there is almost nothing you can do to get a job before you go out there. There's nothing you can do you can get introduced to people, but you don't want to go take those meetings until you're there, because if they have a job for you, jobs in LA go in like 2 weeks. You know what I mean? Like, especially those entry-level jobs. So one nice part, although your parents will hate this, as mine did, is that you kind of have to hold your breath, leap, and go out there and give yourself 2 or 3 months to find what it is that you're going to do. Now, I'll talk a little bit about film school and writing and directing and acting maybe when we break, or if you guys have questions, maybe that's a more appropriate time to do, and I can talk about how you get to those places. And there are different paths for different people. I would suggest for anyone trying to come into the industry, I did not have the pleasure of getting to intern for a summer, so I was really clueless when I got out there, and really went out there for 2 or 3 months having no idea and getting very lucky. Well, half lucky, half manufactured luck, I guess I would say. And so that part of things is going to make you twice as stressed, I'm sure, because you're going to walk out of this and be like, oh, great. Now it's not only hard, but now I can't do anything until I go move to LA and get a car and get an apartment. Sorry about that. But it is part of the trial by fire of sort of getting into the business. Now, of course, these things can be done in New York as well. I focus on LA not only because I live there, but because it is increasingly the epicenter of film and TV. And New York has fallen off a little bit just because there's less companies that are doing it there, and the indie world is just changing. But you know, I would strongly suggest anyone that is interested spend a little time in Hollywood so you can see what you're dealing with, even if you end up not wanting to live there, which most people don't. I guess now would be a good time to open it up to questions. How long have I been blathering on? Oh, great. Questions about anything, because I know I didn't talk specifically, because I talked about my journey. I know I didn't talk specifically about, you know, internships or what you should do to get out there, or acting or directing or whatever. Yes?
How basic of a script can you have to approach somebody? I mean, how full-blown and worked out does it have to be before you go and try to hook up with a writer? If you just have a concept or a short story.
Me personally?
No, I'm just saying.
One in general, like as a producer, a non-writing producer.
If you have, yeah.
And you want to find somebody to write it for you.
Yeah.
Right. And what did you say? What's the best way? How do I?
I guess how.
I do
How
do
much
that.
work do you have to have into it before you?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, for example, if you have a book, let's say, if it's not just an idea, but you're talking about just an original idea,
Yes.
right? Probably like, I normally, when I have that kind of thing, and it's usually spurred by like something I've read in the New York Times or something I read in a dorky science magazine or something like that, I tend to write up like a 2 or 3 page thing. I'd be happy to, so I don't forget, when you guys leave, I have all my contact information there at Paramount, so you can email me and whatever after this as follow-up. So I can send you an example of what I'm talking about. But I usually do like a 2 or 3 page thing about kind of what the movie is, and it depends on how much you have. If you just know sort of, you want to do a movie about the Olympics, and you know, but you don't know what the plot is, or you haven't laid out the plot because you want the writer to do that, then I usually lay out what I want thematically, what I think the movie's about, things that are interesting about it, or some specificity about what should be in there. But I try not to, especially if you're trying to hook up with a writer, full-blown out, give them a plot. You can have that if they ask for it, but I find that it makes them feel more like they're in a bit of a cage rather than having the ability, even if you intend it as a jumping off point, sometimes they'll take it as gospel and stick to those things when you don't mean them to. So I just think you have to gauge that. But yeah, like a 2 or 3 page write-up of it is usually. No other questions? Yes,
How do you think the writer's strike has affected what you do and career and jobs?
A lot. The writer's strike. Yeah, the business was pretty much shut down for 3 months. The effect still continues. The strike is obviously over. We've gotten back up and running. 7 TV shows that I sold, 4 of them were killed just during the strike, terminated. 3 of them still alive, no problem. And when I say killed, they'll be resuscitated next cycle, but killed for this cycle. Several movies fell out of production. Several movies now will not go into production. And the vibe in town is actually right this second pretty dismal because, and this will not affect you guys breaking in, the movie business is still going to be there and it will get back on track, don't worry. But right now, I think there was this expectation that while the writers were striking, that they would actually be writing too. But from my writer friends, I know that they spent so much time on the picket lines that they were actually striking, that they didn't actually have time to write. So you have this expectation, this expectation that a ton of material is going to flood in. And you have a bunch of available directors right now without movies and a bunch of stars. But what's weird is there's now this threat of the actors' strike in July. Nobody thinks that's going to happen. And pretty much anybody would say it's not going to happen. However, you can't get a movie bonded if there's the threat, meaning insured, if there's the threat of a movie strike, because it's just out there. So no movies can start after April. We start this Ricky Gervais movie. We're shooting April 14th. I think the very last day you can start shooting and still make it underneath the wire, obviously depending on your schedule, is like April something, mid to late April. But then, come July, who knows? So right now you've got a bunch of directors without movies, writers without scripts, actors without jobs, and producers and agents trying to figure out how to bring it all back together. And it's a little trying right now. It's been really overwhelming coming back because there was this sense of, what do I do first? Because everything was dead. And then now it's settling into old businesses starting to get taken care of and finally getting into a new business mode a little bit. But it's hard. You could sell scripts, what we call spec scripts, speculative material. You could have sent those out and a really great one, sell it for a few $100,000. Now, what I've been noticing as people have started going out with stuff again in the last few weeks, they've been attaching directors or actors to them first, which I always try to do if I have the opportunity before having to rush it out. And they are selling it with those attachments. The scripts without attachments that I've seen go out, even the good ones, aren't selling. And case in point, I actually have one of them that the agent said to me, listen, nobody bought this. We need to package it. Do you want to do it? You were so passionate about it. And I said, yes. So I'm actually producing a script that went out, that they tried to sell, that would have sold a year ago or a year and a half ago, now having to attach somebody if I want anybody to pick it up. So it's It's rough right now still a little bit. It's not leaping back into action the way everybody thought. And there are less shows on the air, so there's less writing staffs to be on for the TV people. And so it's a little bit brutal. Yes,
I don't know if this is a weird question, but how does one become a director?
a lot of ways. But most importantly, you have to, it's a very chicken and egg thing. You have to direct something to become a director. Meaning that most people who like Jason Reitman, for example, who directed Juno and who directed Thank You for Smoking, is a friend of mine. We both sort of, he actually did not go to film school, despite his father or anything like that. He was an English major at USC and creative writing. And he directed a couple of commercials and a couple of shorts. He directed one short in particular in college, a short film, that was great. That became a vehicle for him to get commercials, that then became a vehicle for him to start directing things, and he directed a few more shorts, and then finally got Thank You for Smoking off the ground. But that took him like 6 years. He had that script written a long time. He had that script written when we became friends. And so in terms of that part of it, now how do you get to there? Directors, I actually think film school is worth it for, especially if you're coming from here, because what it'll do, I went when I was in school here, I took one of my summers and I went to NYU, had a summer program at Tisch in their film department, and it was basically like the equivalent of their first semester of film school, and they just give a bunch of kids cameras and a bunch of film, and you go make a bunch of mistakes and figure out how it works. The real programs, whether it's from AFI, UCLA, Columbia, NYU, wherever, all kind of feed directly into those channels, and they make sure that you have a short by the end of it. You know what I mean? Like you will shoot stuff while you're there that then hopefully becomes your calling card, and they'll introduce you. But you could equally just shoot a great short. I've seen, in the last few months, I've seen maybe 4 or 5 people get plucked because of their YouTube stuff. Literally. Like I know a guy who has a show at NBC because he had a really funny YouTube thing and they want to put a TV show around him and whatever. I know a director who did a short or whatever who's doing something with Andy Samberg now and his team because they plucked him off of YouTube, the agents. And interestingly, the agents are now, like, they have agents who are dedicated exclusively to sitting there and watching YouTube all day and trying to find clients. That's crazy. That just happened I found that out coming out of the strike, and I was like, really? And the person who does it, it's a great job because, you know, you sort of sit there and watch YouTube all day, which is probably not that different than being a college student. But, except you probably don't have the beer in your hand. But the sort of, the way the internet is changing things, I still don't think the convergence, we don't know how the internet and movies and TV are going to cross over yet. It does seem that with this like new Apple box that can let you run YouTube and stuff right into your TV that costs like $300, it's the first kind of step in the evolution of merging at least TV and internet. But yeah, it's really, that's the other reason things are becoming decentralized, is because you have internet is becoming this major force, and those tend to be different institutions. And you see this sort of movement now of corporations from Warner Brothers or AOL Time Warner, Viacom, those places getting in league with these kind of sites because they know they're going to have to use them ultimately. They know that they're going to have to use this means of distribution at some point.
Can you talk about the acting side of the business a little bit and how you would...
Do I have to? Of course I can. The acting side of the business. It sucks. Everything you've heard about it is true. I acted a lot in plays when I was in Princeton, and I thought I was going to love doing auditions when I was in production. My least favorite part of production is casting. I think that might be because it hurts me to like go through it, because literally I can be sitting there with 2 other annoying looking people behind a thing, and these poor people have to come in and read for us or whatnot. But sometimes, literally, I'll look at somebody as they walk in the door before they've said a word and be like, she's not right, and turn back to my BlackBerry. And unless my director says, she's the one, I've made that decision for me already. And, you know, we all vote on it and try to compare notes and figure out whatever. So we don't always agree, and we try to figure. But we sort of keep our separate little notes. But I hate it, because here's the thing, is in stage acting, right, how you look pixelated with a thing up in your pores like this and revealing every single inch of it doesn't matter on stage as much. And so this need for like the look of whatever the part is, typecasting runs rampant. I mean, we all typecast, you know? And because I also it's not like school. And in school you have a lot of choices too. But like I have every actor, actress, whatever. So we have blonde actors, brown-haired actors, red-headed actors. If the director doesn't see the dude as a blonde, no blonde person should come. I mean, the casting director stops calling back in blonde. They could be perfectly good. They might even be better. But it is one of these things that is very difficult. Now, that being said, so I'm not a total sourpuss, the best way to get stuff is to have a reel. In this age of digital technology and YouTube and whatever, like what I just told you, about the guys who got signed off of what they did on YouTube, there's ways now of creating a reel of yourself doing stuff that are perfectly acceptable to agents and studios and whatnot in terms of signing you or getting you work that you can do with probably the video cameras of people sitting in this room, you know? So I think that what's hard is you can't just get this sort of like myth of going out to LA and you're sitting there in a restaurant and an agent, or you're waiting tables and an agent picks you out and I mean, these stories you hear about Matt Damon or Ben Affleck, these are, for every one of them, there's like 100,000 other people, actually maybe even 1 million other people. So it's very difficult and subjective, and my friends who do it, I find it excruciating. Even people who are bigger actors, it's not, I mean, you think like that you know, Jen Aniston or whoever is not wrestling so much with those kinds of things. But in fact, they are, you know, and they're still nerve-wracked about if they're going to get that next part. And they're still, so no matter how successful you get, you're always afraid of kind of falling in that. The other thing is you can write for yourself. I think that my friends, I have a very good friend who acted on a lot of plays with me here, who then started writing, who now is a writer on Men in Trees and quite a successful TV writer and film writer. She is such a good writer because of her acting background. She literally has the different voices going on in her head that she's playing as each role. And truthfully, most writers acted at some point in their whatever. And the reason I say write is because if you can write something for yourself that then you could shoot some snippet of digitally or some example of it, and also if people want what you write, then you have a little more pull over it, you know? So I think that in this age of entrepreneurialism and all these means that you have at your disposal, that there's a lot more ways than I would have had, for example, as an actor trying to come out and create a reel for myself, other than try to like go out there and hope that a casting director would like me enough to introduce me to an agent or whatever. But there's a lot of hoping if, you know? So I feel like the more you can take the reins by either putting yourself in something that's filmed and creating a reel of yourself, or by writing something for yourself, or some combination thereof, that's the best way to probably try to show a route of some sort. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about the different types of entry-level paid positions that are in production companies like yours?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, most people do start out as either PAs or assistants or agent trainees. I'm sure I'm missing a category, but those are pretty broad. The agent training programs, probably 75% of my producing colleagues worked at an agency at some point. They were trained in an agency training program for a year before they left and went to a production company. In those things, which I think are great because they're at the heart of the business. I don't want to be an agent, but I sort of wished I had done it as a part of my path, because you do get to really see how things work from the inside, the messy inside. So those jobs are real launching pads, those training programs, to getting jobs at production companies or studios or whatever, and a lot of people make that move. PA jobs are on set, production assistant jobs. There's usually like, it depends on how big the movie is, but there's usually several PAs, anywhere from 5 to 10, who do various things. Those jobs are harder to get. Those jobs tend to be very nepotistic, like the assistant director who usually picks the people for those jobs. Like I usually get to put 2 PAs on my movie, is sort of the agreement I make with the AD. Like I just say these 2 people are PAs on any movie that I do, so that I have the ability to either place somebody who's done well for me or somebody who's coming out from school I can put on a thing or whatever. But most people, it's about the introduction. Now, you know, those set jobs, obviously a lot of people want them. I would also say they're kind of useless. That must sound ridiculous to you. Why would a job on a set where they actually make the movie be kind of useless? In fact, it's not kind of useless because it is really good to see a movie shot or a TV show shot and get the mechanics of how all that works, because that is your end goal. And what I've always found in production is that I learn a million lessons that I apply later to other projects in development to cut myself off from having the same problems later down the road in production. But those jobs, are fewer and far between, and you have to get sort of, introduced to them. The assistant job, and why I think this is why I would say that being on set is a little useless, because your path, there's a couple different ways to become a producer. One, you could just find a great movie and produce it, and you're a producer. I mean, any one of you could call yourself a producer if you had a short story that you said you controlled. You're a producer. It's really easy to get cards made that say producer, I think that those jobs, people usually want you to have a little bit of experience for. I tend to find that interning in a summer, depending on who you've interned for and if they'll give you a recommendation, will take care of that requirement rather than having had to work at an agency for a year or work at another company for a year. And those jobs are desirable because if you want to become a producer, or even if you want to be a director, and by the way, a lot of directors and a lot of writers also start working at the agency. Why? Because as soon as they're finished with their script, they can give it to the people that matter because they're working at the agency. So again, half the writers I know were assistants at William Morris or CAA or Endeavor at some point, or worked in the business as a regular sort of functionary while they were burning the midnight oil, writing their great masterpiece, or doing whatever they were doing to break out of that. So the reason I say these jobs are more important is because they're the ones, once you're in a production company or a studio, these what are called development jobs for the most part, are what lead you to becoming a producer. Because line producers, you can put on a movie and they know how to produce the movie, and most of them are very creative too. But their job is to deal with the nuts and bolts of like the actual physical production. A producer is responsible for developing, is responsible for everything from finding the idea or generating it to the day it opens up in the movie theaters, making sure the marketing campaign isn't screwed up, and everything in between. I'm the independent contractor who has to deliver that. So the best way to learn how to do that is to be around it. And also what ends up happening in those companies is you get to read scripts more, and agents' assistants get to read a lot of stuff to evaluate it too. But there's a way that the industry has. I always say whatever your first job is, doesn't matter. Just get a job and know that you're going to stick in there for 6 months or a year, because what you will get is grad school from that. You'll get the vocabulary, you'll get the know-how, you'll get a feel for the town, you'll hopefully be reading a lot of scripts, you'll be figuring out how it all works. That's the other reason not to stress. You're not trapped in that first job you take. And I always tell people, you will probably leave this first job in a year. I will probably help you, and you will probably never think about it again and move on. And that's the right path. So those are the three kind of ways of doing it. Is there an easier one? The agency training programs are more structured to get into. So like, sending applications or resumes there is very easy. The other jobs you literally can't go up for unless you're in town. Like they won't talk to you unless you're in LA or meet with you or whatnot. And then you can go up for them, but you may have to overcome that experience requirement or whatnot, which again can be done with the internship things, or you may have to go get some experience. Yes, sir.
Hi, what is your opinion on being able to transfer skills from like related industries like television?
Say again, sorry?
What is your opinion on being able to transfer skills from related industries like television to the movie industry?
From
like television, let's say if you worked, like if you on the production side in a television show.
Yeah, sorry, I just didn't hear the question, I think.
Like, are you able to transfer like skills learned from like television on the television side to
into film and film and stuff? Yeah, because it's all the same thing. I mean, you're standing around with 150 people with a bunch of cameras and shooting stuff. And now the way they're shooting TV, I mean, Heroes is a movie, Heroes is a movie every week, and their production level is kind of the same. So yeah, those things I think inform each other a lot. And TV writers I think are great because they have to write so fast and under such pressure. And I think TV is in sort of a golden, or it was before the strike, there were some really great things going on. And you're seeing a lot more like the Ron Moores of the world breaking through on Battlestar Galactica and then, writing movies and back and forth. So it's become very fluid between the two worlds. Yes, sir.
What about like the film school track for production? What do you see as like the advantages and
None.
disadvantages?
None. I mean, I'm just being honest. That's my opinion. I have friends who've gone to the Stark program. I know Princeton graduates have gone to the Stark program, which is one of the few actual producing programs at USC. What's nice about the Starkies is that you have an automatic introduction to the community, and you can sort of get up and running. You ultimately end up having to get a job or whatever anyway. Do they teach you how to produce? Kinda, but they stick you with a bunch of other people who don't know what they're doing because they're in film school too. So you're not really learning, like you should learn from people who know more than you. So I don't mean to be so coy about it. I think any education is great, but I feel like that would be a wasted year. I'd rather have you on the floor somewhere, you know what I mean, of an agency or a studio learning the way it works. That's grad school.
How different is producing?
Okay. Okay.
How different is producing for television and producing for film? And is television also centered in Los Angeles, or is there more in New York, or is all?
Shows are shot, as you know, all over the place. So there are shows like Law and Order or whatever that shoot in New York, and movies, of course, there are all the time movies shooting in New York. But where they're sold, like when you sell a TV show idea, you sell it in LA. When you sell a film idea, you can sell it to some places in New York, but generally you're pitching in LA as well. So yeah, that is kind of the epicenter in terms of getting going as a writer or as a producer or whatever it is. And then, if you end up shooting stuff in New York, then maybe you could make yourself New York based ultimately or something like that. But it is, yes, the epicenter of things now.
So we're just going to formally end right now, and we'll have reception time. Marc is available to speak with anyone afterwards. Thank you very much.
No problem.